Affinity is a deck with a long history in Modern. The name of the deck comes after the mechanic Affinity for Artifacts, a mechanic that cheapens spells cost by the number of artifacts you controlled. The idea of Affinity is to spam out a bunch of cheap artifacts and then utilize artifact synergies along with Affinity cards to overwhelm your opponent. This was the deck that threw out its entire hand turn 1 or turn 2, leaving maybe one card left in their hand. The deck even has several cards banned in the Pauper format because of it. But despite this, Affinity, notably Blue Affinity, has fallen off over time. While this is normally written off as just what happens when games progress throughout the years, Affinity gained numerous powerful tools over that time. So, what happened? Why weren't those tools enough? Why does no one play Affinity?
That was it. Dismember off the top for Ethan Brown means that he gets to kill the...
At exactly, he goes to exactly 1 life.
And he attacks and that's it!
With the Vault Scourge.
Game is just over. Like this game
That was it?
This game is flat over. Like,
wow, what a beating.
he just drew a Galvanic Blast. He doesn't slow roll it, he just shows it to him, and there's the hand. Andre Prost wins Grand Prix San Antonio.
I want to start this video by saying that we are primarily focusing on Blue Affinity today, not Hardened Scales Affinity. Though, we will be talking about Hardened Scales Affinity more towards the end of the video. So let's start off by looking at a couple of Affinity lists, starting with an older one. This list, piloted to a first place finish by Manny Doty at GP Las Vegas 2017, is a great example of older Affinity. We've got some classics. Memnite and Ornithopter represent 2 0-drop artifact creatures to add to the artifact count and potentially attack when equipped with cranial plating. Springleaf Drum is also able to utilize them, converting them into additional mana for the turn. Arcbound Ravager essentially acts as an aristocratic pump spell, able to eat a bunch of artifacts and then itself to put counters on a big evasive threat. And speaking of evasive threats, Etched Champion gains protection from all colors when you have Metalcraft online. Vault Scourge is effectively a 1-mana flyer, Blinkmoth Nexus is a flyer right out of your lands, and Inkmoth Nexus can also come out of your lands and win with an Infect finish. To help boost their creatures, Master of Ethereum lords all artifact creatures and itself is a huge body. Steel Overseer can continue to put counters on creatures as the turns go by, and Signal Pest doubles as an evasive threat and a team pumper, triggering Battlecry when it attacks. For instants and sorceries, a playset of Galvanic Blast utilizes Metalcraft to turn Junker artifacts into either removal or damage to the face. Finishing out the artifact slots, we have a copy of Welding Jar to offer additional protection to our creatures, and a playset of Mox Opal. This card allows artifact decks to jump in mana just by playing out their cards. This allowed for very fast starts, sideboard tech options in different colors, and multiple copies could chain into more mana. Outside of Inkmoth and Blinkmoth, Darksteel Citadel is our other artifact land, just there to offer fodder for Metalcraft, Arcbound Ravager, and Cranial Plate. Alright, so Affinity lists were pretty impressive for 2017. None of the cards felt particularly dead or do nothing, all served a purpose as a cog in the machine. So now, let's look at a modern day Blue Affinity list. Quite a few cards are the same, but some have changed as new cards have been printed. Our Affinity package now includes Frogmite, Thought Monitor, and Thought Cast. Frogmite is a 2/2 for effectively 0 in the deck, only needing 4 artifacts on the field to make it free. Thoughtcast is in a similar boat, needing only 4 artifacts to draw 2 for a single blue, and Thought Monitor is a Thoughtcast with legs and wings. Wrapping up the new creature suite is Kappa Cannoneer, a 6-mana creature that can tap artifacts to cheapen and improvise its cost. Not only does it have Ward 4, it also gets counters and becomes unblockable every time an artifact enters, including itself. Also, I lied. There's one more new creature in the main deck and is there due to an aggressive Urza Saga package. Believe it or not, a land that makes constructs and can search any 0 or 1 colorless artifact from your deck is pretty solid. This package includes Haywire Might, an efficient answer to the One Ring, Welding Jar, a way to protect your artifacts, Aether Spellbomb to bounce problematic creatures and a cycler, Lava Spur Boots to hit hard and fast, Pithing Needle to shut off certain activated abilities, Shadow Spear to hit harder and less faster, and Soul Guide Lantern to obliterate graveyards. You could also grab Memnite or Ornithopter, but that's not really why they're there. A couple of Metallic Rebukes round out our improvised cards to offer some interaction against opposing threats and removal. Outside of Urza Saga, Treasure Vault and Silver Bluff Bridge turn your land drops into affinity count. Okay, that sounds pretty great for a deck. The deck now has Kappa Cannoneer, an Urza Saga package, and 2 1-mana draw 2s. So why isn't this seeing more play? Affinity's ability to vomit out its hand, play a big threat, and utilize big draw spells while being its biggest strength is also its biggest weakness. What do you do when the plan fails? Well, draw out of it with a Thoughtcast effect. But what if you draw into do-nothing artifacts at the wrong time? What if your opponent just counters the Thoughtcast? This is something that Affinity decks have struggled with since their existence. Power and synergy at the cost of versatility. It even shows in the interaction lineup. Affinity rarely runs more than 2 Metallic Rebukes in its main board. So what do you do when your opponent has 3 must-deal-with spells? Well, you slam beaters and hope that's enough, and sometimes it is. Cranial Plating, Shadow Spear, and Kappa Cannoneer offer strong clocks that can end games on their own incredibly quickly. But you know what else offers a strong clock and can end a game on its own? Psychic Frog. It can even use your entire hand, but instead of needing your entire hand to bring it out, you just need to discard 1 card at a time to make it stronger. And you can exile those discarded cards to give it flying. And it gets to synergize with another powerful strategy, delving cards for Murktide Regent. On top of all of this, Frog Murktide decks run a strong suite of counter magic and removal to back up their threats, something that, as mentioned already, Affinity can't really do without losing consistency on its main game plan. And what's the payoff for following this game plan? The payoffs in Affinity are incredibly powerful. Kappa Cannoneer, big constructs off of Urza's Saga, even Simulacrum Synthesizer was considered at a time to be able to vomit out constructs off of every big Affinity spell you played. Not to mention 0-mana 2/2s and things like Cranial Plate, but the cost is heavy. In older Affinity, each card in the deck acted as a cog in the machine, each supporting each other and offering multiple different avenues of winning. Different threats, going tall versus going wide, and cards that synergize to buff different areas of the deck. In modern day Affinity, a lot of these pieces, due to meta changes, have been cut in favor of centralizing on Kappa Cannoneer, Thoughtcast effects, and Cranial Plating. In order to maximize on these, you have to run a high density of cheap artifacts that you hopefully draw at the right time. It's not ideal getting the one threat you had countered and then top decking Ornithopter 3 turns in a row. And sure, you have new artifact lands to help you with this, but they either only tap for colorless or enter the battlefield tapped. Meanwhile, Frog Murktide gets to run both Psychic Frog and Murktide Regent for the extreme cost of being in blue and black and running some instants and sorceries. Okay, sure, Frog Murktide doesn't rely a huge amount on synergy to play powerful effects, but Boros and Mardu Energy use synergies with their energy mechanic. Sure, but it's a little looser than Affinity. The energy cards these decks use are fine on their own. Having additional energy cards alongside them just accelerates the payoff. Plus, those decks run cards like Ocelot Pride, Ajani, and Flage for the low cost of being in red and white. It may be unfair to compare cards like Flage to cards like Kappa Cannoneer, but keep in mind, they entered Modern at the same time as each other. Cannoneer requires artifacts on board already, and you need to draw into more. Psychic Frog just needs cards in your hand and graveyard. Thoughtcast draws 2 with 4 artifacts around. Cantrips do a little over half of that for 1 mana period. Synthesizer can create a construct every time an Affinity creature hits the field. Flage, lightning helixes on ETB and attack, not to mention a 6/6 body when it escapes. And there's one more modern staple that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's one that, ironically, Blue Affinity doesn't usually run. The One Ring is an incredibly powerful modern staple, allowing you to blank a turn of damage and draw you several cards over the course of the turn. As an artifact, you might think that Affinity would immediately slot this card in, but Unfortunately, the One Ring just doesn't play well with Affinity's plan. The deck plans on cheapening expensive cards to the point of running very few lands, so hard casting a 4-drop becomes far less feasible, instead using Thoughtcast effects to keep up. But again, the cost of synergy is still hurting the deck's ability to run anything else. Drawing more cards than Thoughtcast over the course of those few turns with the One Ring might be the difference between Kappa Cannoneer pushing in for lethal and dying on the crackback. Okay, so this doesn't really fit anywhere else in the video, but really quickly, I just wanted to bring up Wrath of the Skies. A double white X sorcery that gives you X energy, then allows you to pay any number of energy to destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy paid this way. So this card kinda cooks Affinity boards. For the low cost of double white or double white and additional mana, you can obliterate their entire board, and even catch some lands along the way like Urza Saga and Treasure Vault. It also cleans up Construct tokens. Now, not every single deck in Modern is running Wrath of the Skies right now, but the fact that there is an incredibly cheap card in Modern right now that effectively says destroy target Affinity player just isn't great for the deck. But there is still a way to play Affinity in Modern without feeling completely kneecapped. The Hardened Scales variant of Affinity has been around in Modern for quite some time now. The idea is to utilize Hardened Scales effects along with cards like Arcbound Ravager, Zabaz, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Walking Ballista, and others to either go for a big beatdown plan, win out of nowhere with a big Walking Ballista, or put all your counters on Inkmoth Nexus for a poison counter finish. While Hardened Scales Affinity's current meta share is similar to Blue Affinity's, there are some notable differences between the two. For starters, Hardened Scales runs far less do-nothing artifacts for synergy's sake. In this list, 3 copies of a Welding Jar and a single Springleaf Drum are the absolute maximum do-nothings in the list. Though I'd argue that Welding Jar is a very strong way to dodge removal, so it doesn't really count. Hardened Scales also gains access to Ancient Stirrings, an incredibly powerful card for the deck that allows you to go 5 deep and offers card selection versus raw card draw compared to Thoughtcast. Plus, it's always 1 mana. Hardened Scales and the Ozolith, while obviously powerful cards for the counter synergy, also pair well with Innkeeper's Talent, a new card to the list. Not only does it put additional counters on creatures, once leveled up it can offer Ward 1 on all permanents with counters, and can be a counter doubler at level 3, including your poison counters from Inkmoth Nexus. So not only does the deck run a large density of effects it needs to make its beaters bigger to go on the beatdown plan, it also can win with Walking Ballista or Infect out of nowhere, giving the deck reach, longevity, and a little bit more versatility. Now, Hardened Scales isn't the best deck in the format. At its core, it can still run into the same issues that Blue Affinity has because it is an artifact deck, and can still run into those anti-artifact cards that completely obliterate the deck. But while Blue Affinity struggles with its single-minded linear game plan of spam big things, Hardened Scales Affinity offers enough different paths to victory that, while its meta percentage is low, it is a decent under-the-radar choice for the current Modern meta. Blue Affinity, like every artifact deck, took a hit with the banning of Mox Opal. Since then, several cards have been printed into Modern to help it. Cards like Kappa Cannoneer, Simulacrum Synthesizer, Urza's Saga, Thought Monitor. All of these were printed seemingly for artifact decks like Affinity. But despite this, Affinity has never really risen up to where it was before in the Modern metagame. Because, unfortunately, these payoffs weren't enough for the deck. While the machine itself had improved, the cogs that the machine needed to run were old, rusted. And with competition from Hardened Scales variants, Blue Affinity fell to the wayside. Will Blue Affinity rise to the top of Modern again? Well, perhaps with time, new cards will be printed, new cogs for the machine. But until then, the machine is condemned, old, broken down. And the hums and whirs of Modern's past are no longer heard.